First story, The Horns of Holloway. It was a chilly night when I found myself driving down a desolate road near Holloway Forest, a small village in West Virginia. I had come to meet a friend for a hunting trip, but something felt off as I drove past the bare trees and twisted branches. The wind howled through the woods, and whipping the fallen leaves around like whispers from the depths of the forest. My friend Ben had told me about the legend of the Holloway Hunter, a creature that wasn't quite man and wasn't quite beast. I brushed it off as local superstition until I saw the first sign. As I pulled into the clearing where we were supposed to meet, the sound of branches snapping echoed through the darkness. I stepped out of the truck and called for Ben, but there was no answer. The only sound was the crackling of dry leaves underfoot. I decided to venture into the woods to find him, my flashlight casting long shadows on the trees. As I walked further into the forest, I felt a chill creep down my spine. The air was thick with the smell of decay, and I could hear the sound of hooves clicking against the ground. It sounded like a man walking on two legs, but with the distinct clatter of hooves following each step. Suddenly, I saw a figure in the distance, its outline faint against the tree line. It was tall and bent at an unnatural angle, its shoulders too wide, its head unnervingly close to the ground. And then I saw it. The creature's face was half human, half goat, with horns curving out from its head. I screamed Ben's name and ran toward the figure, but it turned and disappeared into the darkness. I searched for hours, but could find no trace of Ben. I was alone in the woods with the strange creature lurking in the shadows. I never saw Ben again. The next morning, the village found only his rifle and a trail of footprints leading into the forest. But there was something else, a pair of hoof prints right beside his tracks. I left Holloway that day, never to return. And whenever I drive past that forest, I can still hear the sound of hooves echoing in the night. Second story, The Hunt in Cedar Hollow. It was a crisp October morning when I found myself standing at the edge of Cedar Hollow, a dense forest nestled near the small town of Bentonville, Missouri. The sun was just beginning to rise, casting long shadows over the misty woods. I was here with my friend, Ethan, for a hunting trip we had been planning for weeks. Ethan was an experienced hunter, but this was my first time venturing so deep into the wild. The forest was eerily quiet, with only the occasional rustle of leaves breaking the silence. We set up our camp near a clearing and decided to explore different parts of the woods. Ethan went north while I headed east. As I walked deeper into the forest, the air grew colder and the trees seemed to close in around me. The silence was unnatural, and it felt as though the woods were watching me. I kept my rifle ready, but there was no sign of wildlife. No birds, no squirrels, nothing. Then, heard low, guttural growl that seemed to come from every direction at once. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. I spun around, trying to locate the source of the sound, but the forest was empty, or so it seemed. Suddenly, a shadow darted between the trees. It was fast for me to get a clear look. I called out to Ethan, but my voice was lost in the dense woods. The growl came again, closer this time, and I realized I wasn't alone. I started to back away slowly, keeping my rifle raised. That's when I saw it. A creature emerged from the shadows, its form barely human. It was tall, its limbs elongated and unnaturally thin. Its eyes glowed a sickly yellow, and its teeth were sharp and jagged. Before I could react, the creature lunged at me. I fired a shot, but it barely seemed to slow it down. I turned and ran, the sound of its footsteps thundering behind me. I didn't stop until I stumbled back into the clearing where we had set up camp. Ethan was nowhere to be found. His gear was scattered on the ground, and there were deep gashes on the trees around the campsite. I grabbed our things and ran toward the direction we had come from. Could still hear the creature in the distance, its growls echoing through the forest. I never saw Ethan again. The authorities searched the woods, but they never found any trace of him or the creature. To this day, I can't explain what I saw in Cedar Hollow, but I know one thing: those woods are not meant for humans. Third story: The Hunt in Whispering Pines. It was a chilly November morning when I arrived in Whispering Pines, a tiny village hidden deep within the forests of Maine. The village was known for its dense woods and its legends about the hunters who never returned. I had come here with my friend Mark to hunt for deer. Or, at least, that was the plan. Mark was an avid hunter, always talking about his skills and the trophies he had collected. I had never been much of a hunter, but I agreed to join him for a weekend adventure. The villagers warned us about the forest, their voices low and cautious. Stay on the marked trails, Halidisi Tau. An elderly man said, his eyes narrowed. And if you hear whistling at night, turn back. We laughed off the warning. Legends were just legends, right? The first day was uneventful. We hiked deep into the woods, setting up camp near a clearing. The air was crisp. The only sounds were the rustling of leaves and the occasional snap of twigs beneath our boots. As the sun set, a heavy fog rolled in, shrouding the forest in an eerie silence. That night, as we sat around the fire, we heard it, a soft, melodic whistling carrying through the trees. Mark looked at me and grinned. Probably the wind, he said. But there was something too deliberate about the sound, a pattern that felt unnatural. The next morning, we found strange tracks around our camp, large, three-toed prints that neither of us could identify. Mark brushed it off, insisting we press on. By afternoon, we spotted a deer and decided to split up to corner it. That was the last time I saw Mark. Hours passed, and the forest grew darker. I called his name, my voice echoing in the stillness. No response. Then I heard the whistling again, closer this time. It seemed to move around me, impossible to pinpoint. Panic set in as I realized I was lost. The trees all looked the same, the fog growing thicker. As night fell, I stumbled into the clearing where we had set up camp. Mark was there, or at least what was left of him. His body was twisted and lifeless, his eyes wide with terror. Beside him lay a small wooden figurine, crudely carved to resemble a man. The whistling returned, louder and more persistent. I grabbed my rifle, spinning around to face the sound. A shadow emerged from the fog, its form inhuman, its eyes glowing like embers. It raised a long, bony finger and pointed at me. I ran. I don't remember how I found my way back to the village. When I arrived, the village didn't seem surprised. They simply shook their heads and muttered about another lost soul in the forest. To this day, I can still hear the whistling when I close my eyes. It haunts my dreams, this reminder of the hunt that turned into a nightmare. And I know one thing for sure. Whatever lurks in Whispering Pines is still out there waiting for its next victim.